University.
Greetings, I'm Shad. Medieval chivalry and knighthood is one of the more popular aspects of medieval history, and interestingly enough, it's one of the more misunderstood. And to correct some of those misunderstandings, I have made a full video on medieval chivalry, addressing one of the bigger misconceptions about it, that it wasn't a uniform code that was universally understood amongst all people throughout the medieval period. It was actually a very subjective subject, and of course I go into much greater detail explaining the reasons why and the sources in my dedicated video. But what I haven't addressed is the actual medieval knighting ceremony itself. But recently, I was able to attend the largest medieval festival in all of Australia, the Abbey Medieval Festival, hosted by the Abbey Museum of Art and Archaeology, and preparatory to the beginning of the festival, there was an authentic medieval knighting ceremony held for one of the reenactors. And of course that gave me the opportunity to not only witness this recreation, but to sit down with two of the organisers, James Dellard and John Locke, to talk with them a little bit about the misconceptions of the medieval knighting ceremony.
I'm James Dellard, Knight of England, a member of the Enterprise of the Black Garter, and my reenactment group is the Company of the Staple.
My name is John Locke. I am Herald of the College of Herald. Herald Pursuivant is my title at the moment, one of the founding members. I'm also a member of the Company of the Staple. I am not a knight.
I overheard you guys are based in the 14th century, late 1300s.
Yes.
Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay.
Specifically, the Company of the Staple reenacts everything up to the year 1376 and localised to Calais in France.
We've just had the pleasure of witnessing the knighting ceremony that was performed by various, you guys of course were involved, and there was, how many others were coming forward to speak and give some of the recitations?
There were two other heralds that spoke, and then there was a squire came forward. He was bearing the cushion, which was placed on the ground for our knight to kneel on, and he was also bearing Sir James' sword to be able to do the knighting, the traditional dubbing, as it were, which has got a lot of meaning to it, and a lot of people sort of talk about what does it even mean, and there is a lot of meaning there, but yeah, that was his role.
Care to share some of that meaning?
It's about, well, as far as I know, and correct me if I'm wrong, but a lot of it is to do with a knight shall never receive a blow and not answer it in kind, essentially. A knight shall stand up for it, and it is, in essence, it is the last unretaliated blow that a knight will ever receive. And sometimes you'll see that done as being
a slap.
A slap, yeah, exactly. And
I've seen that done in various places.
Hollywood movies and that sort of stuff. Yeah,
to grab onto that.
Yeah,
but it wasn't done here. Is there a specific reason? Because you're focusing on a time period, a location.
We're actually focusing on a book of chivalry. Most of what was said this evening was from the Book of Chivalry by Raymond Lull. So the passages that were read by the heralds were from that book. Now, in that book, there are descriptions of the accoutrement of a knight and their symbolism to Christianity. That can be brought into the knighting ceremony. We chose not to today because we wanted to stick to the original knighting ceremony. And I chose the first piece that you saw was a piece that I wrote this morning when I was thinking about the knightly virtues and how they really are true Christian virtues. I really felt that I wanted to write a piece that showed that these knightly virtues, while they can be seen as earthly, do pertain to God.
I wanted to jump on that because I find that quite significant that you're aware of the nuance that there can be variance, and even the person performing it can pick the kind of exact words that he wants, because chivalry was never a uniform standard thing.
Not at all. Not at all.
Ceremonies.
This is that idea of things being uniform and the same everywhere is such a modern construct.
Even spelling.
That was exactly the example I was going to use. Back then, there were no dictionaries, so you wrote the word as you thought it was spelled, and
punctuation.
That's how it was spelled, or punctuation, in fact. And so sometimes you go back and you look at medieval texts, and you think, I can't read this. It doesn't make any sense because there's no punctuation. But that's just trained to our modern brain and to our modern ear. And really, it is if you say it, if you speak it out loud, you'll often hear where the punctuation probably would have gone on, and you can see what they were trying to spell. It's very phonetic, I guess, is that. But there's no standardization. There's no standardization across anything.
When I wrote this piece, I wanted to use my knowledge of those virtues based on what I had read and try and look at that duality of chivalry, how it has an earthly cause and it has a godly, heavenly cause. So yeah, I couldn't sleep. So I got up and I started penning that. I had a few reference books out.
This is the medieval nerd equivalent of counting sheep.
Yeah. And I just felt it was really, really important. So it's something I decided to open the ceremony with. And then of course we finished the ceremony with a passage from Duar de Galileo. Now you are a knight, and it is fitting that I should tell you something that pertains to chivalry. A knight must be hard, courteous, generous, loyal, and fair of speech, ferocious to his foe, frank to his friends, and debonair. And lest someone tell you that he has not bore his arms and struck a blow in battle or tournament is not by rights a knight. See to it that you so conduct yourself that you have a good right to the name. He has a right to the title of knighthood who has proved himself in arms and thereby won the praise of men. Seek therefore this day to do deeds that will deserve to be remembered, for every knight should make a good beginning. So that passage, I probably saw that the year that I came, the first time I came as an actual combatant. And it stuck with me. And then it came up in one of my books, and I badly have a big biro ring around that passage. And every time a knighting ceremony comes up, I quickly race to my book. I flick through, and there's a big biro circle that circles that passage.
And I expect even in the historical period, whoever was actually performing the knighting could have made it, the words that he was speaking kind of catered towards the individual knight, the person, because he probably knew them personally, and could have focused on certain elements that he wanted this knight to either improve upon, exemplify, so on and so forth.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So the actual dubbing itself, which is the thing you are doing with the sword, okay, and there is the classic on the shoulder to the other shoulder. I've also seen it done where it's just held over top of someone's head, and there's actually no touching of the person or anything like that. So what, I guess, reference do you take from to decide how you do your specific dubbing?
We actually talked about that prior to the ceremony tonight, about what exactly it was going to be. And it can be, as you say, it can be held over the head and no touching. It can be a single touch, a double touch, or even a triple. It can be no dubbing and a slap. Sometimes it can be slapped with a glove as well, any of that sort of stuff, and it all carries the same representation.
So, quick question about that: would the slap supersede the dubbing with the sword, or is it? I guess I would almost assume it actually preference. You could do both. You could do one or the other.
I've seen ceremonies where they've done both. The unanswered blow was a backhand. So I think we did that last year actually, and then the dubbing. But the dubbing was at that point is now more of a like we're finalising the ceremony. This is the moment where you became a knight. You know, I dub thee. Kind of thing.
And I would say that I've read up on that many years ago and came across several different styles, and I cannot tell you where
Again,
there's no standardization. That's exactly right. We come back to the same thing.
So even the virtues, sometimes there's a deviation in which virtues, and you might have noticed that the wording was different. If we wear a garter that has it in Latin, obviously being more traditional. Sometimes we'll say strength instead of fortitude. There'll be different takes on that. And there are other knightly virtues that don't come up as well. So really I had to choose from a text. Luckily, the four cardinal I chose were the four cardinal in the Lull book. And I think they're probably the most common.
They are the most common,
the knightly ones are probably the ones that vary the most.
And they would vary most likely by region and also by period.
And the region that you were drawing inspiration from sounds to be French. Is that French?
Well, here's where things get tricky, right? This is where we get back to talking about the group that we belong to, Company of the Staple. Company of the Staple represents English people in Calais in the year 1376, because at that time, Calais was part of England.
Yeah, and
right?
in case people don't know, Calais is in France.
Calais is in France. It is, and the reason it's important, it's a big port city. But there's a huge swathe of France at the time that is not just English held; it is part of England at that time. And so the fact that we have knighted Chevalier Theodore Sauvage, he is a French knight, right? But he's been knighted by an English knight.
See, I love this nuance because it's just so sophisticated as well. Because it's funny, the layperson just assumed English and French, but most of the English royalty and nobility were French.
We're French and German. And there's a number of people in our encampment that are knights, but they are Ritter because they're Germans. And again, they might actually be English, but their heritage is German, so they'd be called a Ritter.
So my family name is James Stallard, and that is a Norman name. I would have French lineage. I am an Englishman, and in my persona, I guess you'd call it, I am a knight on the marches of France. So I probably have quite a few French friends, French people that work
You spend
in the
most of your
garrison
time in France.
In France.
Yeah.
So an Englishman with a very heavily influenced by the French culture that I live in.
It cannot be understated how intertwined England and France are. And particularly the rest of Europe as well. But England and France, so tight and so interwoven.
And I might be thrown under the horse and cart for this, but I believe Lull is a Spaniard under the influence of the Cluny Monastery, which is a French.
You want to talk about nuance? There you go.
Yeah, beautiful. Something that I found interesting, and someone else even asked you about this, was the length of time that a squire was a squire. This is something that I find a lot of people don't understand, again, the nuance, and because it could have been a short period, it could have been really long. Of course, the status of squire changed depending on period and location, and certainly towards the latter end of the medieval period, the status of squire was very high status. And so is there anything you can expound upon in regards to that? Like how long, some examples you could give, like the other question asked about, how long some people were squires before they were knighted?
Yes, so it was asked earlier, so how long it would take for a squire to become a knight. It's actually quite broad. Once again, in the medieval time, things aren't so standardised as they are now. A lot of my reading and a lot of the books are saying that 16 to 18 is a common age. But I think if you have the right connections, possibly nobility, you could be 12 years old, maybe younger. And then you have the example of, say, Bertrand de Gleeson or de Glechlin, depending on, once again, how you pronounce that, was not knighted until quite late in his career. I believe he might have been 30, leading many, many men, very skillful tactician, but obviously didn't have the right connections at that time. Went on to be the Marshal of France, so they obviously worked something out. But there's a case where someone might be long in the tooth, because 30 is quite old for the medieval period, and to still be a squire. So I think if you take those two bookends, which I don't want to say is set in stone either, that would probably be a good window.
Yeah, something I find really interesting that was another thing that you don't find commonly understood is the reputation this individual squire has amongst his peers and how much influence they have to determine if he's ready to be knighted or not.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, the reputation is everything. And, you talk about a man who's probably waited until his early to mid 30s to get knighted. It's also entirely possible there were other people out there lobbying against him. It's not just necessarily people who were before him, but there might be people going, no, don't knight him for whatever reason. They can be as mundane as I don't like him, and they can be hugely economical reasons, like we don't want him to take control of this particular area because we get our food supply or blah, blah, blah. There can be a multitude of reasons why that sort of stuff can happen. Politics is massive.
So in the book The Last Duel, which is set around our time, I think, I can't remember, it's 1386, once again, don't throw me under the horse and cart. In that, there is a knight that rapes a squire's wife. Well, that is the case, the case put forward, and obviously everybody backs their two parties, and it goes to the last judicial combat overseen by the French monarchy. And what that kind of tells you is this squire has actually done more service. It probably, from a modern perspective, would be more of someone that you would see that should be knighted. But the knight that allegedly did the rape, he was already a knight through his connections, not so much his prowess. And they did fall under a similar sway of influence. And I think politics was a big part in him still being a squire.
Something that I think will be a very interesting topic to just quickly touch on is we see instances where squires have huge military service, heaps of experience, and be really high up in the noble rankings already. Okay, and for someone like that, what do they gain out of being knighted? What's the difference? Because they already have a decent amount of influence and respect and service, as we've seen examples of. What happens? What changes for them once they're knighted?
It's a prestige thing at that stage, more than anything else.
Also, you get paid more.
You get paid more.
But then you're also expected to provide more as well.
Yeah.
So sometimes it was avoided for that reason.
That's interesting. So, I haven't heard that before. That's great.
So it was quite an expense to be knighted. I think I might have mentioned when I was talking about largesse, it was to give gifts to friends and peers and banquets to your station. When you have your knighting, that's a very, very expensive thing. And then once you go to war, you're expected to bring more. And if you can't bring more, you have to pay more.
So when you say bring more, is this certain what troops under his command, squires he's already training?
All archers and everything.
So there are lists, there are roles where it said, we called Sir Tom to war and he is expected to provide 5 men-at-arms kitted out in this way with this armour. He is expected to provide 20 men with spears and helmets, and he's expected to provide 10 archers with this many arrows each with yew bows and blah, blah, blah. And this is all documented in roles and lists. And he has to pay for that. Yes. That's on him.
So it could be a very economical reason to not be knighted.
Yeah.
And another measure of how much you have to bring is how much the rents of your land is worth.
Yes.
So what they found in the late 13th century is that these retinues that were being brought were not always the best quality. Edward I started to bring in the scrutinage, like a shield tax. So he was kind of more interested in people paying up than people bringing retinues. So there's kind of a shift throughout the 14th century that by the time of our period, most armies are paid for, more professional. Yeah. There's still a feudal aspect to it, but it's losing. Losing its grip more and more.
It's starting to become more of a profession.
And mercenary groups were coming around.
Yes.
I mean, we touch back on this idea of the group that we represent, the Company of the Staple. But the Company of the Staple was a real organisation, probably the first recorded mercantile company as we would know them today. And they were important because they were this mercantile company.
So when you say mercantile,
I mean like a business. Okay, and the business of the Company of the Staple was exporting wool. Or importing wool.
And were they given the monopoly?
Yeah, and so they were given
wool
importing wool
to sell wool, and then probably sending fabric back the other way.
So importing the fabric into England.
Yeah.
And essentially they had a monopoly on the port of Calais. Everything that went in and out of Calais, they had their fingers in, and they were taxing. And they were given absolute carte blanche by the king. Tax whatever you want, charge whatever you want, but your job is to pay for an army that will stand at Calais and defend it at all times.
This is so fascinating. So the name of it again was?
The Company of the Staple.
The Company of the Staple, right? So this is essentially a military organisation.
No, they're an entirely
mercantile monopoly.
Yeah. But the whole business aspect was to raise funds to support.
Well, that was the cost to them. Yeah. But the thing was, they could say tax whatever tax they wanted, as long as they had this army and paid for it, then they could tax whatever they wanted. So they were making money hand over fist, but they just had to pay some of it to have this standing army. And there was a specified, like, we need this many, this many men-at-arms, we need this many archers, blah, blah, blah. And that was a garrison. That wasn't the town militia or anything like that. That was essentially a standing army that just lived at Calais to defend, because the port was so important.
Yeah.
And so they were given this right. They basically owned it in the name of the king. and can tax it as they
This
want.
was run by noblemen's knights.
By merchants, essentially, by guildsmen. They're not nobles, they're not royalty, or they're not born into that sort of stuff, but they were still probably pretty wealthy to begin with.
Yeah.
And there are you want to talk about nuance. There are nuanced levels to society. You've got everyone thinks it's nobles and peasants, but there's so many levels in between that. Yeah. And there's tradesmen and guildsmen, and some of them would have been very shrewd business people, and then somewhere between the nobles and the guildsmen, there's also, you have the lawyers and the doctors in there as well, who've been going to university and they're very well educated.
And sure, there's a bit of a rising middle class, but these merchants are up there money-wise, if not even they just don't have that blood right.
Very much so.
To certain things.
And then so back to your original question about what's it worth to be a knight. These merchants might be filthy rich. They might be able to afford everything, but they'll never be a knight because they can't be knighted.
And that would exclude them out of certain circles,
absolutely.
events.
Yeah, they would have influence with the court, but they could never be a part of it.
So, what conditions would someone need to achieve to have to be knighted? I guess in this context, from a reenactment group and stuff, what are your standards? And was there a reason why they went to your group or authority to receive this knighting? And so what's kind of the organisation there, and what does people need to do to try and have this happen?
Okay, so the chivalric group we have that is not a reenactment group, it's different members from different groups. Enterprise and Blackguard are very big on reading history and reading chivalric material. There was a few questions in there.
Yeah,
one is, was one of the questions how we decide.
Excuse me.
Yeah, how do you decide who gets knighted, basically?
I think there are a number of elements to that. And I think the first one is they have to already be a squire on the field. Now, anyone in modern reenactment, unlike back in the Middle Ages where you were born into being a squire, in modern reenactment, anyone can become a squire just by acquiring the equipment that they need to fight. Now, that's no mean feat in and of itself.
You refer to two things when you say to perform on the field and to fight.
Performing on the field is fighting.
So they actually need to enter into some type of competition that's happening on the reenactment.
Absolutely. So we have tournament fighting. The tournament will be here at the Abbey Festival this weekend, but there are tournaments all over the country. So they need to be able to participate in that. In order to participate in the tournament, there is a minimum equipment standard that we have, which is for safety reasons, but it's also historically correct.
Yeah.
You wouldn't have someone out participating in a tournament without knightly armor because it's a prestige thing as well. You're being seen, you're being evaluated when you're out in the tournament field. It's not just about how well you can fight. It's show us how much money you have, show us how nice your armor is, show us your fighting styles, all this sort of stuff. So there's that element. They need to be able to participate in the fighting. They need to have the equipment. Then they need to display virtue, which is a lot of what was talked about here, because the assumption is that you've got the gear, you've made it through being a squire, you are physically prepared to be a knight, but are you mentally prepared?
Yeah. Have you studied?
Have you studied your stuff? And so for the gentleman who got knighted tonight, part of why he was chosen by his peers to be knighted was simply, as we sort of explained towards the end of the ceremony, he has been one of the leaders of his reenactment group now. I don't know, at least 5 years.
Oh, yeah, I'd say 6.
5 or 6 years.
Yeah.
And
they'd probably tell us longer.
They probably would tell us longer because we'd never know anyone else's group stuff. But he is elevated and suggested that other people be elevated to knight before himself. Yeah. And sort of it became within them a little bit of a joke. They're like, it's time. Yeah. He has to do this now.
And so why did they come to your group to be knighted? Is there a certain, because you do it more accurately or you have some type of authority?
I would say that the worth that you bring to the reenactment world and the amount of time you're willing to put into the study comes out in the end.
It's also about within our community of reenactors, it's about respect. Both of us are respected for what we do within the reenactment community. I do heralding So James does fighting and studies up on all this sort of stuff. And,
Sure, yep.
and it's not just that we do it well, and we teach it.
Well, it makes sense as well. I mean, if you are going to have a knighting ceremony recreation, you would want the group that can do it the most accurately.
Yes.
Okay?
So we weren't actually a group, we were a body of different people at that stage. So
Of the 5 of us standing up there, 2 of us from Company of the Staple, but we live in different states. The 2 other heralds were from a different group, but are part of another sort of overarching group, which is the College of Heralds, which is represented here by the 3 of us. And then actually, so was the other gentleman. He's part of the college as well, just in a different capacity.
Yes.
And we're all, and he's now going to head into the fighting. He wants to be a squire. And so, talk about how does one get into that? He is just aspiring. He's just acquiring the equipment and learning to fight and that sort of stuff. And
So I guess our respect comes from our peers to the work we've done. So we'd hope that our worth is built on our deeds. I guess that's why they would choose us.
And then that's why they choose us. Yeah, exactly. That's what I was going to say.
And it's actually quite an honour to knight somebody as well, to actually physically do the knighting. What that person is saying is that they respect you because who knights you is a representation of who you are. And those, like I said, that participate in the ceremony, whether it's in attendance, carrying a chivalric device, carrying something that's part of the ceremony, that's those people through their actions saying that they recognise that person is ready for knighthood.
And many of those people who were carrying things were knights themselves.
Yeah.
They weren't servants. They were knights. They were noblemen up here showing their respect.
Now, something interesting that I was kind of wondering about, the character qualities mentioned about knighthood, and of course this comes from the book Raymond Lull wrote and stuff. How much of those qualities are expected to actually be carried into someone's real life, from the reenactment side to the real life? Like, for instance, the about not being a drunkard is an interesting one I found, and because there was also a lot of Christian elements in that and stuff. And so, is there a line where the reenactment stops and your personal life continues, or if someone is really into this, do they actually try and carry this into their actual life?
There's kind of 2 aspects to that, and that is I am a knight only because of my peers that are here. So obviously in my day-to-day life, I'm not a knight, but I would say that I like to embody those values in my life. I wouldn't say I'm the most fervent churchgoer. No. I do read scriptures, especially scriptures that I feel are an influence on what we do. And those virtues, yes, I'd say in some aspects, especially being nurses, they become part of your life.
That's actually one of the things that I find is a great appeal of chivalry to just regular people, is this noble, higher romantic ideal that, it kind of sits above, the standard behaviour that people have. And it's something that's to look up to. It's something to be admired. And so that's one of the reasons I find people have this kind of attraction to this chivalric ideal, is about these virtues that are so intertwined with it, of course. And that's the more romanticised kind of interpretation of chivalry. It changes depending on period and so on and so forth. That is awesome, fellas. Thank you so much for sitting down and let me throw these questions at you.
It's a pleasure to be part of it.
Yeah, it's a pleasure to be part of it.
And there we go. A massive thank you to James and John for sharing their knowledge with us. Thank you for watching. I hope you've enjoyed, and of course, I hope to see you again. So until that time, farewell.